you know, I want to go into the contemporary scene just very briefly, trying to stay within my time here. You know, at the same time, this malicious, you know, this very particular kind of expression of the radical right rose very rapidly and fell very rapidly. You know, what we saw at the SPLC, monitoring these groups and tracking them, was that all the time, I mean, we did not, as a general matter, classify militias as hate groups. You know, most of them you couldn't say, look, this is a group whose ideology is based on race or is based on, you know, gay people killing or something like that. We had, you know, a whole separate list of hate groups. And so during that period when the militias rose and fell, you know, you saw this through the 90s, this very steady growth in hate groups, race-based hate groups, that has continued to this day. You know, so, and as I mentioned, I think earlier, you know, a lot of this was about globalization and the kinds of fears of change that Randy mentioned. I think, you know, very, very important was that idea that in the year 2050, the Census Bureau is predicting, you know, this will no longer be a white majority nation. And of course, you know, in the years leading up to that, you'll see that happening state by state by state by state. So there are real changes happening. It's not merely a paranoid fantasy. I mean, part of it is a paranoid fantasy about how terrible it's going to be and what's going to happen to, you know, white people as a result. But, you know, these are people who respond in sort of perverse ways to real things, is really the point I'm trying to make. You know, kind of heated up, so we had this very steady growth, and in fact, well, we'll get to that in a second, you know, at the same time, of course, 9/11, it's been mentioned several times at this conference, had the immediate effect of kind of pushing up anti-Muslims and anti-Arab, anti-foreigner, and anti-immigrant in general. And it was really, in a sense, the moment when anti-immigration, sort of the nativist movement, started to really more come into its own. The other thing that happened early in this millennium was the Lawrence decision, which was the Supreme Court decision striking down the anti-sodomy statutes in, I think, 13 states or so. And, you know, from our point of view, initially it looked like the issue of kind of the decade was going to be gay people. And that was really where all the energy was going. And we saw very clearly after the Lawrence decision, it was quite amazing to see that, you know, I remember we did kind of round up these groups and looked at them, and, you know, the Nazis had something to say, the Klan had something to say, but in some ways it was the Christian right that was most vicious. And they came out after the Lawrence decision saying, you know, this is akin to legalizing bestiality, you know, pedophilia, and so on. Really quite amazing and defaming things. But I think that was really entirely overtaken by the immigration restriction movement, which I'll talk about in one second. Let me say one very brief thing, because this is really a conference in large measure about hate crimes, and you know, remarks were made from the podium about hate crimes being the #3 state and so on. As I think was said, you know, first of all, Michigan reports very well. So, you know, you're not really the #3 state in terms of hate crimes. I think that's clearly not true. The other thing to say, though, is that now just speaking nationally, is there are a lot of hate crimes in this country. I think many people outside this kind of community, sort of out there not particularly involved in this world, think, you know, it's a lot of hype. We're talking about a few hate, you know, a few of these very ugly crimes. Yes, they're bad, but there really aren't too many of them. And, you know, the same kind of accusation sometimes made against people like us. So, you know, the SPLC, they kind of, there are a few hundred Nazis running around, they hype it up, and, you know, they make money off it, raise money. You know, what I want to say is that the FBI has been publishing annual compilations of state hate crime statistics since 1992. And for that whole time, they have showed between about 6,000 and about 10,000 hate crimes. It's kind of fluctuated up and down. A couple of things. One, you can't tell anything by those fluctuations because the system is completely voluntary, and the number of agencies that report go up and down. Hawaii, for instance, has never reported. Alabama was officially reporting, but for years and years reported 0 hate crimes, which here is not the case. The point I want to make, though, about hate crimes is that the Department of Justice in late 2005 came out with a really important study. And it was a study based on crime victimization surveys, as opposed to simply collecting statistics produced by police departments. And what it found, and this included both reported and unreported to police hate crimes, was that the actual level of hate crimes, this is based on 3.5 years of data, these victimization surveys are extremely detailed surveys and are thought to be very accurate statistically. They concluded that the real level of hate crimes in the United States is 191,000 a year. That's a lot different than 6. We're talking about 20 to 30 times the level that people have generally thought exist out there. So that said, so it's a problem to say the least. And I would just say, I think that that means something. I mean, because the statistics really are important in some ways to me. Hate crime data collection is more important than hate crime penalty enhancement laws because it's the statistics that really guide public policy. Where should we be putting our law enforcement dollars? Where are we really concentrated? What is important? And it reminds one of all the hoopla about serial killers a few years ago, which turned out, I mean, you want to get the impression very strongly about serial killers that they were everywhere, sort of murdering beautiful young women right and left, and come to find out, we're talking about very, very few people nationally. In that case, a lot of money was put into the serial killer phenomenon, and I think ultimately probably could have been better directed elsewhere. About immigration, let me say that in the last 5 or 6 years, I don't think there's any question that immigration has been the #1 factor driving the growth of hate groups. By our count, in the year 2000, there were 600 hate groups, most of them white supremacist groups, although there's some black supremacist groups and maybe 1 or 2 brown supremacist groups, but the bulk of it is in fact, white hate groups. They grew from 602 to 844 last year in 2006. That's a 40% rise. And I'm not going to claim to you that the numbers of groups are an absolutely accurate indicator of exactly what's happening out there, but I think that there is real rise. This isn't just a sort of statistical phenomenon of one group splits into 2 and each one gets half the members. I think they really are pretty well thriving at this point. Let me tell you how we got into the immigration business, because I do want to talk a little bit about it. We saw very early, I remember in 1998, our very first inkling of what seemed to be coming was when we noticed in a little town, Alabama, Coleman, Alabama, there was a particular meeting. It was an anti-Mexican rally, and it involved burning the Mexican flag. I'm certain the whole thing was a pretty cool rally, but what was really caught our attention was the fact that you had, in this little group of people doing this thing, the Mexican flag burning, you had an important representative of FAIR. It turned out it was put on by FAIR, this event, the Federation for American Immigration Reform, which is very much presented as a mainstream organization, and in fact was created by this man, John Tanner, from Michigan, Petoskey, Michigan, a retired ophthalmologist up there. Well, at that meeting was an unrobed Klansman, a member of the Council of Conservative Citizens, which is a descendant of the old White Citizens Councils. Council of Conservative Citizens, just to give you an idea, is a group that says black people are, quote, a retrograde species of humanity, and so on. So, that gave us the first clue. It seems like the hate groups maybe are beginning to pick up on this, and they're kind of seeming to work with the groups that present themselves as more mainstream. What followed that, I mean, this is, I'm talking about a demonstration of 15 people, it's a tiny little event, but it did give us, as I say, a sort of clue.